ultimately. I mean, we call it space opera, but people don't realize it's actually a soap opera. And it's all about family problems and it's not about spaceships. So they decided they didn't want to use those stories. They decided they were going to go do their own thing, and so I decided, fine. But basically, I'm not going to try to... They weren't that keen to have me involved anyway, but at the same time I said, I'm not going to... If I get in there, I'm just going to cause trouble, because they're not going to do what I want them to do. So, and I don't have the control to do that anymore, and all I would do is muck everything up.
Today, I am proud to announce the Walt Disney Company is acquiring Lucasfilm, the global entertainment company founded by George Lucas and the home of the legendary Star Wars franchise.
When the Star Wars sequels wrapped up, it was impossible not to notice how they made the prequels look like a stroke of misunderstood genius.
Oh, muy, I love you!
Disney acquired Lucasfilm in 2012 for $4 billion, and it was a seismic cultural event. George Lucas had spent decades crafting his universe.
I had an idea to do this kind of film. I was curious. Just an idea I had about psychological motifs that are in mythology, and if they're still accurate today.
Imbuing it with his vision, his quirks, and yes, his flaws. And with one stroke of the pen, that vision was handed over to a company best known for squeezing every last drop of revenue from its intellectual properties.
This country was built on slavery, which means slaves built this country.
The mouse had landed, and the Force would never be the same. And honestly, who could blame them? Star Wars had become a global phenomenon, and Disney, with its unparalleled ability to milk franchises, was ready to tap into that well of nostalgia and revenue. For years, the fan base had raked George Lucas over the coals for the prequels, and after Revenge of the Sith in 2005, Lucas had had enough. Phantom Menace hit theaters in 1999, the internet wasn't the endless pit of fan theories and Twitter outrage it is now, but even then, people hated it. Yet, if you step back and look at the prequels in their entirety, it's clear that Lucas was attempting to build something far beyond just action scenes and space battles. He was trying to tell the rise and fall of an entire civilization. He later admitted in interviews that the constant criticism wore him down. So when Disney came knocking, offering billions and promising to respect his vision, he figured it was time to let someone else take the heat. But respect? Oh, please. Disney respected his vision the way a fast food chain respects a cow.
Let the past die. Kill it if you have to.
From the moment Disney took over, their intentions were pretty clear. They were never going to honor the soul of Star Wars. They were going to turn the franchise into an infinite money printer. The first order of business was to wipe the slate clean. In 2014, they declared the expanded universe, decades of books, comics, and games that had enriched the galaxy, non-canon. Fans who'd spent years invested in stories like Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy or the Knights of the Old Republic games were told, "We need a blank slate to sell our shiny new toys." Lucas's Star Wars was chaotic and bold. The prequels didn't always work, but they were undeniably ambitious. Disney's approach, on the other hand, was sanitized and safe, designed to appeal to the broadest possible audience. The results were predictable. What made Star Wars, well, Star Wars, was replaced with spreadsheets, focus groups, and synergy.
The over 25 fan base is loyal to the first three films, and they are actually in their 30s and 40s now, so that they're in control of the media, they're in control of the web, they're in control of everything basically. So mostly what you're hearing from are people over 25 years old. The films that those people don't like, which is the first two, actually are very fanatically adored by the under 25-year-olds. And if you get on the web and you listen to these conversations, they are always at each other's throats.
The appeal of Star Wars to Gen Zs might be more complex than people think. Gen Zs love the prequels because we didn't watch them in the right order. And by right, I mean the order older folks think of as the Holy Grail. Original trilogy first, then prequels, and finally, whatever you can stomach of the sequels. My generation came to Star Wars backward, sideways, and sometimes through a meme. And honestly, that chaos might be why the prequels actually make sense to us more.
Part of the reason I went back to tell the prequel of how Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader is that it's an interesting story, and it's a fun story to tell, because it is the story of how a good person turns bad.
I mean, it's easy to mock the prequels. There's plenty to criticize, but for all their flaws, the prequels had a purpose. Lucas was building a mythos, a political allegory, and a deeply personal exploration of power and corruption.
It's about good and evil, but heroes, what makes a hero? What's friendship? What's the idea of sacrificing yourself for something larger? They're all really basic things. They say, well, we don't have to make a movie about that. It's very obvious, but it's actually not. It's not that obvious to a lot of people unless you have somebody tell you every generation that this is what our country believes in.
The Phantom Menace gave us trade disputes and Senate debates, hardly the stuff of childhood fantasy, but these weren't random choices. Lucas was drawing a parallel to the fall of real-world democracies. Palpatine's rise to power through manipulation and bureaucracy was a commentary on how institutions rot from within. Lucas once said that Star Wars was inspired by the Vietnam War and Nixon's presidency. The prequels took that idea further, exploring how systems of power fail their people. And this makes sense when you look at Attack of the Clones, where Lucas goes into the dangers of authoritarianism and the seductive nature of control. Anakin's descent into darkness talks about the allure of power and the belief that you can fix the world if you just bend the rules a little. And Revenge of the Sith ties it all together, showing us the final collapse of the Republic and Anakin's transformation into Darth Vader.
I have brought peace and security to my new empire.
What's remarkable about the prequels is how much world building they do. Lucas introduced entire planets, each with its own distinct aesthetic and role in the story. He expanded the Jedi Order from a few wise elders to a sprawling organization with its own flaws and blind spots. He gave us the Clone Army, the Separatist movement, and the Sith's long game, all of which made the galaxy feel richer and more alive.
These are my kids. So
all those Star Wars films.
All the Star Wars films.
They were your kids.
Yeah, well, they are right. You know, I loved them. I created them. I'm very intimately involved in them, and obviously to
and
sell
you
them
sold
off,
them.
I sold them to the white slavers that take these things and.
Okay, but I mean,
The sequels gave us absolutely nothing. When The Force Awakens got to theaters, the hype was astronomical. I've always thought Abrams played it safe, too safe. The film was essentially a retread of A New Hope. Rey is a scavenger from a desert planet, a nobody who discovers she's destined for greatness. Starkiller Base is just the Death Star, and Kylo Ren is a Vader fanboy with daddy issues. When it came out, everyone, including me, was so high on Star Wars nostalgia that we overlooked the obvious. It was A New Hope with a fresh coat of paint and better CGI. And you know what? That wasn't necessarily a bad thing. The movie was competently made, had some genuine heart, and hey, at least they had a clear direction, even if that direction was copied and pasted from 1977. But the real problem wasn't The Force Awakens playing it safe, it was what came next. Disney wanted a guaranteed hit to justify their $4 billion investment, so they leaned hard on nostalgia. And it worked. The Force Awakens made over $2 billion at the box office, but it also set the stage for the trilogy's biggest problem, a complete lack of direction.
That you will never be as strong as Darth Vader.
The absolute worst thing about The Force Awakens is that it cursed us with Rian Johnson. Johnson's whole deal was subverting expectations, and yeah, he nailed it by torching everything fans loved about Star Wars. Rey's parents are nobodies. Luke Skywalker is a miserable, bitter hermit who gives up on everyone and everything. Snoke is a discount Palpatine knockoff who gets killed before anyone even cares who he is. Luke tossing his lightsaber over his shoulder was Johnson screaming, "Nothing you loved about this series matters anymore." The whole movie was dripping with this smug, I'm smarter than Star Wars attitude. The Canto Bight subplot was a preachy, pointless lecture about war profiteering that added nothing to the actual story. Disney's response was total fucking panic. Instead of committing to literally anything, they scrambled to backpedal with The Rise of Skywalker, a movie so desperate to win everyone back that it pleased literally no one. Palpatine coming back out of nowhere? Lazy. Rey suddenly being a Palpatine? Laughable. The whole thing collapsed under its own desperation to fix the mess Johnson left behind. In trying to be edgy and different, Johnson wrecked Star Wars, and Disney's pathetic attempt to patch things up only made it worse.
You know, he progresses from being a bright, smart, loving, caring young boy to being an attentive, hardworking, but ambitious Padawan learner who feels that because he's better at his being a Jedi and his Jedi skills than most of the other Jedi, that he should progress further and faster. And as he progressed, it was his inability to control his temper, his greed to control things that were his undoing.
The fan base's reaction to the sequels tells you everything you need to know about their quality. I understand the prequels were divisive, but they've actually gone through a kind of cultural rehabilitation over the years. Millennials and Gen Z fans have come to appreciate Lucas's vision, even with the flaws. But the sequels have already started to fade into irrelevance. Rey, Finn, and Poe were supposed to be the new face of Star Wars. I mean, Rey's still getting her own movie. We'll see how that goes. And Disney is obviously more interested in mining nostalgia with shows like The Mandalorian than building on the sequel's foundation, if it ever had any. The legacy the prequels left behind is probably the most underrated part of them. Lucas's Clone Wars animated series took the groundwork laid by the prequels and expanded it into one of the most beloved pieces of Star Wars media. Characters like Ahsoka Tano and Rex became fan favorites, and the series deepened our understanding of Anakin's fall and the Jedi Order's flaws. Even Rebels and Andor owe much of their DNA to the prequels' world building. The sequels did nothing but inspire memes and apathy. It's easy to point to the technical flaws of Disney's sequels, the plot holes, the disjointed character arcs, the incoherent narrative, but the real tragedy here is that they missed the point of what Star Wars was all about. And it wasn't about creating a perfect film. It wasn't about focusing on the right way to make money or ticking off the boxes on a spreadsheet. Star Wars was always about vision. The sequels were the mistakes of people trying to avoid mistakes. Lucas didn't really give a damn about what the fans thought in 1999 when The Phantom Menace came out. He made that film because he believed in the story he was telling. He was willing to take risks, even if it meant alienating some of his original fan base, and it paid off. Over time, people came to appreciate the depth and ambition of the prequels. Even their flaws became part of the charm because they were authentic. They were his personal vision, and even if they weren't perfect, they had soul. But Disney's approach was a masterclass in soulless corporate greed. Everything about the sequel trilogy screams safe and marketable. When people called out The Force Awakens for being a lazy remix of the original trilogy, Disney panicked and threw The Last Jedi at the wall to see if something different would stick. It didn't. So, they doubled back with The Rise of Skywalker, an embarrassing Frankenstein's monster of half-baked ideas, desperate pandering, and zero coherence. The worst part is, they didn't even try to hide it. They didn't have a plan, and they didn't want one. Taking risks or challenging the audience was never on the table because that might have meant alienating someone, somewhere. And Disney couldn't have that. They made money, but at what cost? The sequel trilogy didn't just fail, it killed the magic. It didn't inspire. It didn't challenge. It didn't make us care. It left us with nothing but nostalgia overload, recycled ideas. You know, it's easy to forget just how personal Star Wars was to George Lucas. For him, it wasn't just about making money or making movies. Star Wars was his vision of the world, a reflection of his own views on politics, corruption, and the struggle between good and evil. It was flawed, but it was his. Lucas never set out to make the perfect film. He set out to tell a story that resonated on a deeper level, and that's what made Star Wars so compelling. Disney have marketed Star Wars like a commodity, and I get that. But the problem is that they don't get it. They don't understand that Star Wars isn't just about explosions and lightsabers. It's about the characters, the themes, and the ideas behind it. Disney never understood that, and they probably never will.